newly appointed reporter, Gar Myers, for Orange County. He's going to sum up what's happening in the Wilkins murder case. 12 years ago or something like that, 2006, Highway 91 in Orange County, California. Tell us about it, Gar. Gar,
yes.
How do you read this Wilkins case?
It's a murder overcharge. The first one in 2008, first trial. It's a 2006 incident. The 2008 trial resulted in a wrongful first-degree murder conviction, which was years later subsequently overturned by the California Supreme Court as a wrongful conviction based on the withholding of exculpatory evidence, as well as a bad jury instruction as to the temporary safety rule related to Wilkins stealing some appliances from a construction site, and then the court failed to instruct the jury that he had reached the point of safety and it wasn't fleeing in an active theft crime going on at the time that this box fell out of the truck. And then later the off-duty officer, David Paquette, ended up traveling at an unsafe speed, jerked the wheel too hard and ended up in a 90-degree angle and hit a truck and got crushed to death. So they overturned the conviction, ordered a retrial. The California Supreme Court did. And the retrial has taken about a year to get going again. And what's happening now is that it's harder standard to prove on the DA refiled that first-degree murder charge without any basis. It was a wrongful charge. Finally, Judge Goethals threw out the first-degree murder recharge as being baseless, threw it out, and it made it harder to prove. A second-degree murder is harder to prove than first-degree murder because you have to establish implied malice as the elements to prove a second-degree murder case, and that involves 4 different elements that simply don't exist in this case. So what's happened for William, what's happened here is that the DA is in desperation because Cole Wilkins has been in prison now for 11 years. And if he was convicted of the proper manslaughter charge that applies in this case, in which he's probably guilty of, had that been done by the DA in the first place, involuntary or involuntary manslaughter, then Wilkins would have only done, apparently, from what I'm being told, 4 to 5 years in prison total, and he would have been out and on with his life. Instead, he's been in prison 11 years to date, and if the Judge Goethals introduces the manslaughter step-down option, which he hasn't decided what he's going to do yet, then Cole Wilkins will probably have time served, be released from jail, even though he's convicted of manslaughter. If that happens, that's probably the way it'll go. But he'll have served more than almost 3 times longer than he should have for a manslaughter charge, making the County of Orange liable for the wrongful conviction he got in the first place that resulted in him serving 3 times longer. So anyway, the bottom line is what the DA is doing right now, just so you know, William, is that they're building a case of a conspiracy between more than Wilkins, but with his ex-girlfriend and his ex-lovers, and trying to build this conspiracy theft of appliances as if they were an auto theft ring or an appliance theft ring when they weren't. But they're trying to con the jury into believing that Wilkins was still actively carrying out a plan when he dropped the box without his knowledge or intent to do so on the freeway, which ended up with a fatality.
And that fatality happened to be a CHP officer?
Happened to be an off-duty LAPD officer.
An LA
sheriff.
LA sheriff officer.
Right. And what happened is...
And his name was?
David Paquette. Now,
David Paquette.
Now, you need to understand, this is critical, that the first original reports by 2 different officers, Heppenkemper and Bernardin, for the CHP that were on scene, they both separately did reports and both concluded that David Paquette, the off-duty officer, was going at an unsafe speed for the conditions, and that's why he could not avoid the box stove that fell off a Wilkins truck in the freeway. And he responded poorly to it. He may have been distracted or doing something else and then reacted late. And because he over-jerked the wheel, it went from the fast lane and it went 90-degree angle straight into a truck and into the wall. They held that he was primarily responsible for his own fatality. In other words, the primary collision factor is what they call it, the CHP. was determined by 2 veteran CHP officers to be the off-duty sheriff who was responsible for the accident that caused his own death. And Wilkins' box falling off his truck was the secondary collision factor, or the less important factor. What happened is Sergeant Morrison, Joseph Morrison, he was the officer in charge. He wasn't a sergeant yet, but after he ripped up the original reports and doctored up a false report, and then hid that from the defense, he was promoted within months to being a sergeant for doing that.
How convenient.
And it was the worst. It was the worst. They made a big display that Piquet was murdered by Wilkins, that Cole Wilkins deliberately murdered this officer because the box accidentally slipped off the back of the truck. Granted, Wilkins was criminally negligent because he didn't tie it down. This is where it's going. And we still haven't heard all the evidence. But the bottom line is this. Does a guy need to spend 25 years to life in prison because a box
fell off truck, even if he stole it?
Even if he stole it, right.
Even if he stole it. I got it.
So that's kind of the...
So I look at this and I think to myself, don't steal people's stuff. You may end up spending a lot more time than you ever thought of in jail because you committed.
The system doesn't play by the rules.
The system doesn't play by the rules. And that's our story here from the Orange County Courthouse on the 11th floor.
Here's what I saw. After Cindy's case was over about 2:30, I went up and watched the rest of that day's yesterday. That was yesterday, Thursday, in the Wilkins. It was the young man, and he still looks pretty young, though. I guess he's almost 40 or 41. He made a stupid mistake. I mean, a really stupid criminal mistake. He went on a construction site and stole an expensive upper-grade stove, probably still partially wrapped in the box, okay? Then he didn't tie it down on the back of the truck he was stealing it in. And then a little swerve in the road on 91, and it flipped out. The off-duty sheriff deputy's not looking where he's driving. I don't know what he's doing, playing with a radio or talking on the cell phone. But everybody agreed he was going way too fast, way in excess of the speed limit. Now, this is an off-duty sheriff deputy, and at, 5 in the morning? As an LA sheriff deputy, he should know you're supposed to follow the speed signs when you're off duty and not going to an emergency. And he kills himself. Now, when I went into the courtroom, the witness, who was another CHP officer, was asked by the defense attorney defending Mr. Wilkins, the criminal who stole the stove. Now, I can see him getting a year or 2 for stealing a stove, but 11 years? Actually was sentenced to 25 years for first-degree murder. And as Gar said, and the Supreme Court, even our crooked California Supreme Court, as Dan Dychek would call them, evil and crooked, even they said, no, there is no premeditated anything here. He premeditated to steal a stove. He didn't premeditate to kill off-duty sheriff deputy who was speeding down the highway and not looking where he's going. It wasn't like the highway was crowded or anything. Anyhow, that CHP officer was asked, have you ever in your department had one of your reports totally torn up, even though it was accurate? And she spent a good half hour asking about how he's trained to do a report and get everything just right. And my report was just right. It reflected the truth, the facts. Part of the report is that the officer killed himself by slamming into that stove or turning sideways, so he slammed into an 18-wheeler or something that also hit the stove. That officer was going too fast, and his report got ripped up. Now, there's another officer who should be testifying yesterday, today, next Monday, but he's conveniently out of state. Now, they've been preparing this trial for a year, but they can't wait for the other CHP officer to come back from his vacation. That's BS, people. They don't want that guy on the stand to testify. What really troubles me is the criminal in charge of the district attorney's office, a guy named, I call him Tony the Rat, And I called him out a decade ago, even before Sheriff Mike Corona went to prison, and I called Sheriff Mike Corona out as a criminal. In fact, I did it, I think it was Sheriff Anderson was on my show. And right before we went in the air, I told Sheriff Anderson, privately, it wasn't broadcast, your friend Mike Corona down there, because all the sheriffs are in a brotherhood of sheriffs called the Sheriff's Association. I told Sheriff Anderson, your buddy there, Mike Corona's in deep doo-doo. And it wasn't very long after that, the federals came in, arrested him, put him on trial. They originally charged him with 100 felonies. I think it was 107 felonies. But they only prosecuted, I think, on 5, 6, or 7 felonies. And on appeal, only 1 felony was upheld, for which Sheriff Mike Corona, ex-sheriff of Orange County, Orange County, he's still in federal custody, though I think he's out of the federal prison and he's in a federal halfway house. I didn't know they had federal halfway houses. Learning something new all the time. I called him out to the criminal he was while he was still sheriff.